talking about our experience and where we're at now. So this is the project with myself and Mark here at Cat Cove. And the boat we use is the Ocean Reporter. It's out of Rockport, and our captain is Bill Lee. And for those of you going out tomorrow, I'll be out on the Ocean Reporter with Bill, and Mark will be with you on a charter vessel, which will be a lot more comfortable and can hold more people. And you guys will be right alongside, and we'll pull the line up and look at some of the stuff that we got out there. Right? But I'm going to go through an overview of how we went through this permitting process initially, and again realized that we were the first ones to do this on this coast. Pretty much at the same time Catalina Sea Ranch was going through their permitting process, and it took them about the same amount of time, but we got stuck at different places. We have been doing coastal shellfish aquaculture, mussel aquaculture, in Rockport and Gloucester, Cape Ann, Massachusetts, at the request of one of the state senators, Senator Tarr.
Yes.
Approached Mark a number of years ago, 12, 13 years ago,
1995.
to see if we could do, set up shellfish aquaculture in north of Boston, the North Shore. So Mark and actually Bill Lee, the boat captain, got 3 different sites set up. But it became pretty obvious to us that this activity to expand commercially, there just was way too much activity going on in coastal waters, especially north of Boston. Just too much, especially lobster fishing and other fishing activities and just recreational boating. There was just too much activity going on. Just around that time, in 2012, there was a pot of money from NOAA. It was an internal grant to look at aquaculture, developing aquaculture in the U.S., and even moving into federal waters. And Kevin's predecessor, Dave Alves, approached us and said, we know you guys are doing this in the Gloucester Rockport area. Would you be interested in applying for this grant with us and seeing if we can get something permitted in federal waters? We said, sure, why not? So we actually got an award in May of 2012. We then approached Bill Lee, who was a commercial fisherman who has given up his commercial fishing license and now does marine survey work, and also does uses his vessel for scientific support, taking various samplings for different projects. We told him, because we thought initially that fishing activity was going to be the major hindrance that we wanted to not compete with. So we told him to pick a couple possible sites. And then we went out and did some preliminary surveys of these sites. And the first thing we did was we had an informal phone conference with the various state and government agencies. And right off the bat, we were told one of the sites was actually in the bottom corner of Stellwagen, which looked like a really nice site for aquaculture. And actually, Hui had done a study putting a long line in that location in the late 90s. So we're like, well, they did something there 20 years ago. It would be a good site for us to set up a shellfish farm. We were told right off the bat that there is no mariculture activities are prohibited in the Stellwagen charter, right? So that site was taken out. Also, Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management decided at that point that they were going to apply for federal consistency. So this was even before we even put in our application to the Army Corps. We wanted to make sure to see how that was going to go. So we had to draw up an environmental impact statement for them, and we submitted the paperwork, and it got submitted in December for federal consistency, and in March that was denied. Our argument was the same activities going on in coastal waters. We're just moving into federal waters and weren't doing anything different than is being done in Massachusetts. So that got denied. At that point, we started the Army Corps permit application. So we public notice. We found out that right across the whole coast of Massachusetts, not just Stellwagen, I mean not just Georges Banks area, but right across the coast of Massachusetts was basically a temporary PSP closure that was just being renewed every single year, right? And at that point, with that closure, it was prohibited to even possess shellfish, right? Is that the? So we looked for some alternate sites, and it turned out that where the Cape Wind site was actually a little pocket of federal waters, Horseshoe Shoals, and as an alternate site that was in open waters, we got a fisherman and Scott Lindell, who at the time was at the Marine Biological Laboratory, is now at Woods Hole. They started submitting their own application for a second permit. Right? So while ours was closed, we would have to go through the same thing, the same procedure that the wild shellfish guys would do. We'd have to get a scientific permit, go through a thing, a period of time, and then try to get it opened with restrictions or whatever. So we felt that try to get a second site opened, a second site permitted, while we still had funding to do that. So that took us through like the middle of May 2013. From the public hearing, public comment period, we got a lot of different inputs for different concerns for both these projects. And one of the things was the Coast Guard wanted us to do a navigation safety assessment, in which we submitted and talked to them about. And then the Coast Guard basically came through and said they didn't have any objections to it, but they wanted us to have some recommendations, which was basically set our header rope on our long line at 50-foot depth because of commercial vessel traffic through the area. They wanted us to make sure that we were in a deep draft, deeper than a deep draft vessel requirements, which I think is like 43 feet. So they asked us, they said 50 feet. Well, we've not done this. We've never done this before. So we're like, well, you know, we want to get out there and see if it's going to work, see if it's feasible. So we said, why not? We'll go to 50 feet, you know, especially if that's going to allow us to be able to set long lines out. So we got through that hurdle. And then we just went through a number of meetings between protected resources, the Army Corps. We every month or two we'd meet together, and then we just back and forth with different questions and answers and trying to change stuff. And we had a sit-down meeting, and it was determined that we needed to come up with a biological assessment. Now, we'd already done an environmental impact assessment that had pretty much the same information, but protected resources at the time wanted it in that format. And there was some other questions that they needed answered too, so they wanted a bit more bits of information. So throughout 2013 and 14, we started going back and forth with this biological assessment, and we just kept going back and forth. And actually, if you look at our biological assessment, there's an appendix to it, and it's basically the email trail with questions being answered, and we're supplementing the answers to it or making modifications to our design, and that's all part is now as an appendix in our biological assessment for this application. But finally, at the end of 2014, NOAA Protected Resources submitted a concurrence letter for the Horseshoe Shoals site, and then shortly thereafter we got one as well, basically saying that they felt that the key thing you want to get is not likely to adversely affect any protected species. Right? That's the key letter that you want to get for this activity. However, both these sites originally proposed to be built out commercially with a number of long lines. Right? Our site, we want 32 out there, but for both of the sites, when we finally got our permit, it was restricted to 3 long lines initially. The idea is to come up, get this gear in the water, run it for a few years, see that it indeed will not impact protected species, namely whales, but turtles, and there's lots of other species that could be impacted, and then go back for a permit modification and be allowed to build out your site. So we finally got our permit in January 2015, right? Our original NOAA grant to do this was to get through the permitting process, and we had enough money in that grant to put one long line out. It was a 1-year grant. We went through a second year, no cost extension, and then we went past that, all right? So we actually had bought all the long line gear, but the grant period had expired on us. So we had the gear, and the conditions were we had to go out every 2 weeks once we started setting up, but we had no money to get us out there, right? So what wound up helping our cause was Legal Seafoods gave us a donation or seed money, which basically covered our boat costs. Right? It pretty much covers our trip cost for a year basis to get us out to the site every other week as we were required for our permit conditions. So we had this permit, but we couldn't fulfill the conditions, so we couldn't get set up. And we had the equipment to get set up.
You were going out to the site every other week just to check that it wasn't adversely affecting anything? Or
We're monitoring for protected species, but we're also making sure that the line doesn't move. And we just do that by a simple side scan going by. And then now that we're working it more, we're usually pulling it up and doing other things off it. But we at least needed to go out, once we put the gear in the water, we had to go out every 2 weeks to monitor. So basically monitor the integrity, make sure it wasn't moving, and then also just make sure no. And we noted whether there was any marine mammals in the area. So we have to cite that. And we need to, every quarter, we actually submit a report to the Army Corps and to Protected Resources. So we copy both. It's basically our trip log. And then at the bottom it says no marine mammals or no protected species were encountered near the site. So this is all the elements that you need to put in that biological assessment. And the reason we brought Nick in is because that's where you're going to get that information, all right? The data portals, right? When we started going through this process, the portal was being developed. So we literally had to go to different places to get this information. Now it's all in one place, right? So between the Northeast Ocean Data Portal and the Marine Cadastry information, you can get all this stuff, right? The vessel trip reports that Nick showed on that sheet, we literally had to write to NOAA Fisheries a written request, and they sent us back a spreadsheet. And we got within a 2 nautical mile radius of the vessels in which port. So all that stuff you can see on one of those data layers, we got that as an Excel sheet that we had to slog through and put in, right? And protected species, they had their own website, so you had to get that information from there, put it all together. Now, I mean, the beauty of the Northeast Ocean Data Portal is you can go there and get pretty much all that information that you need. So some of our permitting concerns were impacts to current fisheries. Again, we picked a site that wasn't being fished by any other commercial fishery. And true enough, we've been out there for 2.5, almost 3 years. There's lobster gear around, but not right in our vicinity. There's long lines at different times, not long lines, gill nets at different times of the year, but no trawling or dragging. It's not a scallop area. So we actually satisfied that. And then the vessel trip reports actually showed us that, right? That we could whittle down and see that there was very little traffic. The navigation safety thing, again, now you can actually see that information. The vessel traffic through, again, we had to ask the Coast Guard when we asked for this assessment, and they're the ones that came back and showed us that within that quadrant, 20, primarily barge traffic, 20 vessels a year go through that quadrant, right? The other thing to think about is when you're looking at those blocks, right? Those are now, they're what, 10 kilometer, right? At the time they were 10 nautical mile, right? We looked at them, right? And one of the things I had to do was try to bring everybody into the reality of scale, right? That's a huge area, right? And what I did was I had on a piece of paper, I don't have it in this presentation, but I had on a piece of paper, I just gave everybody a handout, and it's actually in our biological assessment. There's that 10 kilometer or 10 nautical mile area, and then a little pixel in the middle of that. That's the footprint of our site, right? So again, when we talk about risk management and probability, so if 20 ships go through this quadrant or 20 whales swim through this quadrant on an annual basis, what's the probability that something's really going to get into our site? Right? So that was an argument we had to constantly make with people, with the different groups. But these are the different groups, obviously. Endangered species protection, essential fish habitats, they're kind of one and the same as far as concerns. The sanctuaries, because we were just outside of Stellwagen. We weren't in Stellwagen, but we were just outside, so they had concerns that our gear might drag into the sanctuary. So we had to, some of the conditions are put on our site were to make sure it doesn't move. The EPA had no water quality issues. This is going to start to come into play with now the new shellfish sanitation. If the FDA wants us to do a sanitary survey of the site, which they never gotten back to us. Did they get back to you? But that's still up in the air whether we're going to have to require to do that. But I have some friends at the EPA, and they're like, what's the problem? There is no problem. It's clean water out there. But if we have to do that, we have to do that. But at the time, you had to satisfy the EPA. We didn't have to satisfy the FDA for water quality. And then federal consistency is another thing. So the Catalina, California farm, they got hung up with California federal consistency. And their conditions were more, and their sticking points were more in federal consistency with the state of California, putting all kinds of restrictions or hurdles to them getting their permit. Whereas we actually didn't have to do that at all. We didn't have to deal with the state. So the permitting concerns, especially with endangered species, again, the determination you want to get is not likely to adversely affect, right? And things that our gear or this activity does is, first of all, our long lines are anchored and under tension, right? It's not a surface float that's slack in the water. It can be slack at times, right? We have all the breakaway links that any vertical line needs to have in these waters, so we had no problem with doing that. There was concern about whales, especially, being able to feed on the bottom and also be able to come up to the surface, right? So one of the conditions for this kind of gear was you had to have surface feeding, so you had to have 25 feet clearance on the top and then 60 feet clearance on the bottom. Our site is in 150 feet of water. The Coast Guard already told us our header rope had to be at 50 feet, so we're totally within that. So that's actually not an issue as far as our concern. And then also our grow lines, where the mussels are actually growing on, it's been determined that lines shorter than roughly 20-25 feet are less likely to be an entanglement issue. Longer lines are more able to wrap around. And our grow lines, the longest they're ever going to be is 25 feet. So we're looking at somewhere between 20 and 25 foot for grow lines. Right. And then the other conditions were, yeah?
If you want questions as you go? Or
sure, go ahead.
So on that 25-foot line lines, did you guys choose that length based on that?
No, that's about what the industry does. Somewhere.
So even though you have deeper water, you wouldn't want to try to get over?
Well, it would depend on hauling capacity and weight. Also, and then with the breakaway, or we're using the thin line to tie the things on. So the longer your grow line, the more weight you're going to have. It's roughly 5 to 7 pounds a foot. So you might lose your grow line if it breaks. So looking at what is done here in New England and even up into Canada, that's about the max grow line that people are using, right? And if they're using the Canadian single to 600 foot, they're looping it. I mean, not the Canadian, the New Zealand. So they just kind of loop it, right? But looping probably would not be good with protected resources because now you got a 600-foot line that's looped and some could swim through and get caught. So ours are dangling, right? So they could you just swim through it. You might knock mussels off, but it shouldn't be an entanglement hazard. And we're required to report any protected species in the area. We go out and we're required to visit the site every other week at least. Right? Once it's up and running, a commercially operating farm, you're going to be going out there at least once a week, maybe a couple times a week, just to work the farm. You're going to be harvesting and putting more stuff out. So frequent site visits, and then there hadn't been any entanglements reported in other New England fish farms, and as we've been up and running, we've had no issues. We actually had a humpback whale surface right next to the line, just kept going. Just blew and dove back down and just kept on its way. What?
When you reported your observation?
It's in our observation, yep.
Did they have any feedback on
Nope,
that?
nope. This was the navigation safety stuff. They just asked us about being 50 feet, breakaway links. We have to have, the site is navigation lights on the four corners. Right now we just have the one long line, so they said we just needed one. So we just have one nav light out there. But that's registered with the Coast Guard. It's on the charts. We actually saw it on the nav chart that Nick showed up, right? So that's the site corners are marked with private aids to navigation. We did the local mariners before we started working, so we did everything the Coast Guard required, right? And so as I said, our permit was issued in January 2015. Our whole site, which is 33 acres, basically 1,200 by 1,200 foot area. The site was permitted, but our conditions only allow us to initially start with 3 long lines, right? And then we can go back for a permit modification and ask for a full build out. So here's where our site is. We're about 7.5 miles out of Rockport. There it is there. There's actually the registered navigation aid on a nautical chart. And this is the boundary of Stellwagen. Right? We're about a half mile out of Stellwagen. And there's the federal water line. Right? We're about 7-8 miles out. We're roughly 45-minute, 50-minute steam out. Right? So ideally, you want to get to something that isn't going to be that far away. I mean, obviously, boat time, fuel, you want to minimize that. Plus, you want to be able to get out to your site, do some work, and come back in a reasonable time, right? So we had another site that Bill picked that was way far out, but that was like a 2-hour steam or something. But we didn't even look at that site after.
Why not? Why did you go there instead of closer to the?
We actually, nothing closer met our conditions. So we had the Stellwagen site that got nixed immediately, which actually would have been closer. That site there, and then we had one that was at least 2 hours out, just as a.
So is there more fishing activity between state line and where you are now? Is that why
Yes.
you had 7.5?
Yeah.
33 acres seems like a lot of space. Like, do you need that much space, or is it just sort of kind of like a buffer too? Or?
No, you need that much space. We're actually, I think what we're thinking of at this point is spacing the long lines farther apart and maybe ask for an even bigger area, which I think will definitely help with protected species. 100 feet space seems to be a good space, but even wider. There's a farm in the North Sea, or a couple farm sites in the North Sea being set up, and they're like 100-meter spacing. And I'm not sure exactly why they chose that, but
Spacing, you mean
between individual long lines, yeah, between your rows.
Do you need the space just to navigate the area, or do you think that it's drawn out?
Not really. I mean, the line moves, but it's not gonna. The next line is gonna be moving.
Yeah.
So we don't. You don't need it. You don't really need it for navigation.
Yeah.
But I think I think proposing a longer, wider spacing, I think is going to be more conducive for if a whale were to get in there and if it got confused or stressed out, it's got plenty of room to navigate around and get out.
It's not like a food limiting thing.
No, not at all. So our goal, we're an academic institution, is to, basically expand and develop and become an incubator site, which fits in with our charge here as the Northeastern Massachusetts Aquaculture Center. We're supposed to promote aquaculture in Massachusetts. And obviously, whatever you're growing in federal waters, as Mike said, you're going to bring back into the nearest state for your harvest, right? So it's going to enhance Massachusetts' shellfish industry as well, right? But our idea was to become like an incubator farm. So we'd bring people out. You want to learn how to get into this while you're going through the permitting process. You can come and work our farm. You can work a line or two, right? See what's involved in doing that. Eventually, we'll have a reasonable business plan. What you need to do, and show people how to get into it. Train professional or potential people, not just fishermen. And we're trying to target like an offshore lobster boat with some hauling gear. Somewhere 40 to 50 foot vessel to be able to do this activity.
Saw Dominic Santorello's all over the project. Is he
Actually, Dominic is, I was with Bill Silks last week down in DC, and the site that they picked for Dominic, or the site that they permitted, is not a good site for growing shellfish. So he actually does enough wild fishery stuff. He's got no desire to develop that. So that permit's probably going to expire next year. If you don't start work in the 5 years, it expires, right? Yeah. So Dominic has the permit, and he's not interested in talking with Bill Silks, who might be potentially interested in developing. Bill's like, nah, it's horrible. It's a bad place for shellfish.
Why? Not a good.
What?
Why? Not a good.
Yeah.
What's
He just said it's not a good place. I don't know why.
What, Horseshoe Shoals?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really rough is the big one. That's why the Hui kelp one failed.
Is that where it
back.
blew? Yeah, that's where. Yeah, because that's out there too. Yeah.
a lot of wind,
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot of current.
Yeah. Wind and currents
Yeah,
and
that's the reason why
winter storms. It's not very deep.
Is it over in the entire shoal area?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Coast Guard couldn't keep a light shut out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That should tell you something.
Yep. Yeah, that first the kelp farm Cliff Gowdy's thing, we saw that at Milford. They were talking about it, and 2 weeks later, a big storm came and it was gone.
Yeah, it's out on the bottom
We're
for like 6 months.
yeah,
without
we're
snow.
looking at that going, wow, that's not going to last. But hopefully they get a handle on that. So here's our setup. Here's the private aid. One of the things, again, being sensitive to having a vertical line going all the way down the bottom. This is now here, right? So it's only 50 feet. And then originally we had another line here to this pickup anchor. That's basically eliminated. Basically what we need is 3 pickup lines. And again, we could, if needed, we could decrease that. But these 3 pickup lines allow us to work the different sections of the line. So you need, because we're down at 50 feet, we need that 50-foot scope to get up to the surface. So we have 400 feet long, so we can actually use 300 feet for growing. They're roughly, you put the lines about 3 feet apart, so we can actually have 100 grow lines on a single line setup. And as the mussels grow, you just put counter floats just to take up the slack. But this is pitched at a 45-degree angle. Those corner floats are giving that tension. And it's basically just keeping the whole thing under tension. We're using 1-inch rope, right? So The pickup lines are 3/8 or even we're using like 3/4 inch now, right? Thicker. Well, but we have the breakaway floats links on the top, so if something does swim through, they'll just pop off. So all the requirements that any fishing gear is required to have in these waters, we're under the same constraints. We do mark everything, so all our floats are marked. Where's that little orange? We have these little, basically these are just cow ear tags that I use for some underwater research marking sites, but we have all the permit numbers on it. And we just stick these, I think it's every 25 or 50 feet of line has one of these on it. So again, if a whale gets entangled and we have IDs on our gear, then we know that this came from our aquaculture site or it came from a fishing gear, right? So this makes a lot of sense, you know, marking your gear. And we also have stickers that we put on the floats. So everything's marked. And a couple of good things about the markings is we first put this in, and actually it looks like this with the donut. It had a bad connection on the bottom, and it was a commercial buoy. And right off the bat, the first fall storm, it popped off and wound up down on the Cape in Provincetown. We get a phone call, we got your buoy on our beach, right? We had to go down to the Coast Guard station, right, and picked it up. And we put it back out there, and then it popped off again, right? And we're like, wait a minute, this isn't a good design out here. So now we just have it, it's just mounted on a high flyer buoy. So it just goes underwater during the storm and pops back up as needed. And we haven't lost it since. So we're learning as we go, obviously. But this is our design. We originally had 2,000-pound anchors, and then 1,500-pound anchors is our drag anchors. But actually, I'll get to that in a minute. So here's the original setup. There's that buoy that kept wanting to go to the Cape all the time. But there's our anchors, and we're using pyramid anchors. And again, the Hui study from the late 90s, that's what they used. And they actually did a bunch of anchor tests. And they determined that the pyramid anchors for that bottom type were the best, did the best performance. Yeah.
Can you go back to the slide? I'm just having a hard time.
To the long line?
So, yeah, with the mechanics of it. So when you go up, you don't grab A, you grab like the...
We grab this one, but it's actually here. Or you can grab the middle one. And you pull it up to the boat.
How do you get it? You grab the buoy. and
Yeah,
pull it
just
in.
grab the buoy and pick it up. Yep, yep. So you can do it with a potholer, or the boat we use has an A-frame because he does mooring stuff. So he likes to use that crane and bring it up. And what he's done is he's put little loops. So he just keeps pulling it up, and we get it up. But we've actually had it, when we first put it in, we actually had it up on his pot hauler and going all the way. And I'll show you a picture of that.
So then there's just enough slack in that line to allow it
To get you up, yeah.
And then you just drop it back down.
Yep.
You don't haul it all the way up.
No. So basically, yeah, you're like picking straight up. I don't have a graphic. There is a graphic in some of this literature showing what it looks like, but basically you're up on the surface, so this is just up to here now, and you can just go across. And just like a lobster, so like you bring the lobster trap up, right? You're basically, instead of a lobster trap, you got a mussel line. So you take one off, and then if you're going to reseed.
Yeah, I'm just having a hard time because you pulled the lobster trap off the bottom all the way to the top. So,
Yeah. So
The tensioning
so
factor.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
tensioning,
yeah,
it basically what you're doing is this, right?
Oh, so
Yeah.
those angled 45-degree angle lines basically come in? When you pull that center line up, is that what happens?
Yeah.
They come this way, right?
Yeah.
So that's how you get your leeway,
Well, that gives you the floats on the 45 degree gives you the tension, but yeah, we need to bring that up. We need to bring that. So basically, from here it goes to the surface. So at that point, you're like this.
At the same time.
What?
Just the one you're working on.
just the one, and then the boat moves down the line.
I'll show you.
Or you move the boat down the line.
Here, let me go down. What? See this? So there it is. So that's the stern of the boat, and then going towards the bow where the splitter was.
Buoys down.
Yeah, so that's actually, that's going down to the buoys.
It's like,
Yeah.
Those star blocks on the
What?
that you run in the tunnel.
Yeah, if you, we don't have the star wheels, but
Have you tried them? I was just curious. I thought they was like on kelp lines and stuff, star block.
yeah,
Once
so
you
it's,
have lantern nets and a long line
Yeah.
system, it almost looks like it's clear.
yeah,
Pull the lantern
yeah.
out.
This was early on, and we haven't been using the whole length of the boat to work on it. We've just been working on the stern, off the stern with the A-frame. But we can certainly, we can do this whenever we need to. So there's enough slack, yeah. There's enough slack with that. But that 45-degree angle when it's in the water, it's keeping the tension on the long line. And then the,
That's why the heavier buoys on the end.
yep,
Your
yeah,
ends have heavy, those are your tensioner buoys actually.
yeah, those are the tension buoys.
That actually,
Yep, so they're pulling this way and keeping the tension on that header rope.
Can you go back to, you were starting to talk about the triangle anchors that didn't work out for you, or?
No, these work fine. No, we're actually going to lighter anchors. So that's the site. So we put down the first line in September 2016. About a year later, or in October, we set out a couple of grow lines. We actually had more stuff ready to go, but it took us a little while to get set up. So by the time we got started, we only put out 3 lines initially. And then we had a little test one where we measured all the mussels and then stuck them in. And then every time we pulled it up, we'd measure the mussels again to look at growth rates. Right? So we're doing a lot of, and then a year later, roughly a year later, we did our first experimental harvest. And then last October, we did another harvest. We harvested about 250 pounds. As Mike said, we bring mussels in and get them tested by Division of Marine Fisheries for PSP toxins. Because we're not doing the ISSP testing, obviously we're not selling this product, so basically we were allowed to give it away. So some went up to NOAA, some went to the Gloucester office. We didn't make it down to you guys. Legal Seafoods took some for their chef staff. And we did all the labeling that we needed to do, all right, but we had to, not for retail sale or restaurant distribution. And one of the things, what we're finding out is, look how clean these are, right? If anybody's growing shellfish in coastal waters, especially with invasive organisms, we're not getting any invasives. So we don't get any biofouling. We get a little native hydroid that comes and goes, so it's actually coming right now, but then nudibranchs will come right in and start grazing it out, so by midsummer it's gone. But what we're finding is our mussels grow as well, actually they grow faster than they do coastally. Depth was certainly not an issue, right? We're also doing plankton surveys, so we got some posters from some student projects along the wall there. The plankton supply out there is phenomenal. And when you think about it, Gulf of Maine is the richest fishing area in the world. And what drives that, what makes that the richest fishing area in the world is the plankton, right? This is a typical plankton tow look at under a microscope, right? It's just loaded with stuff, right? And a lot of diatoms, and diatoms are one of the preferred mussel diet, especially. So as I said, we just get a little bit of fouling that comes and goes, and it's easy to scrape off. That's that fuzzy stuff there. That's actually the stalks of that ectopleura. And the other thing about being offshore is the water does not get as cold as it does coastally in the winter months, right? It stays around 50 degrees at that site. And what happens coastally is the plankton dies off, the coastal supply of plankton goes away with cold water, but also the shellfish just shut down. They don't feed, right? So these guys are feeding year round, and we're actually getting really super rich plankton in the winter, offshore. Late winter, early spring, right? It's incredible amount of plankton. They're growing about 4 to 5 millimeters a month. We're getting them to harvest size, so typical PEI mussel you get in a restaurant is about a 2-inch mussel, 55 millimeters. We can get them to that size in about 10 to 12 months. Coastally, it's more like 14 or more. And we got a really good meat to shell ratio and really good quality meat. We were told by the shellfish manager at Legal Seafoods that, what did he say, 7 out of 10 of his chefs said they were the best mussels they've ever eaten. So they're very, very interested in essentially everything we could produce. We could supply their chain. So we actually have a buyer for this product. We can get it developed.
Any thistle drop or pea crab?
No, no pea crabs,
No pearls?
no pearls, not yet. But no pea crabs, no ducks. So this might, what? Well, we're at 50 feet. And that's a hard stretch for them to dive that deep. There's some ducks that can go, I mean, eiders, they said 45 feet, all right? So far, no ducks.
I got easy to pick results with.
Yeah, that's true. So, to me, this would be worth trying coastally or somewhere we know where ducks are present. This would be a good experiment to do and see if you're growing at 50 feet or deeper, right? Provided you get enough plankton. Can you, instead of having to grow your mussels on a raft where the duck predation is really heavy, which is expensive and also requires you to be in good sheltered waters, right? Would our configuration work well in deeper waters, either in a state or in federal waters?
Did you try different blow-out lines? I see you have different samples. The blow-out lines themselves, there's no pegged ones on your list, but what?
No, so these are in the, we're using the Canadian sock that you fill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that has
I
some,
like the herring one.
it's,
Saw some on wraps down there on the beach. They were
it's,
herring in a pool.
well, no, we got some here. So this is the New Zealand fuzzy rope that needs a gauze sock and needs to be done by machine. This is the Canadian sock, and it's basically just a tube, and you just fill it. And it fills about 250 a foot, and it comes in different spaces. We can just pass it around.
And then they sort of bust out of there as they.
Yeah, so it's got a cotton thread in it that wears out, and then it opens up and it becomes like a mat for them to cling to. So that, the Canadian sock is easy to do. You basically just roll it up like a sock on a piece of PVC with a funnel and just stuff it. But it's labor intensive. Again, talking with Bill Silks last week, he's actually bought a New Zealand socking machine, and he said when you ramp up to go commercially, right, that's extremely labor intensive, but if you got a socking machine, he likes the New Zealand one versus the Spanish one, just different technology, but machine based. It just does everything for you. You just fill the hopper with your seed, and it just creates your seeded line. So that would be something to consider as you're ramping up, kind of thing. But one of the things, another thing, question mark, was, okay, we know we get coastal mussel settlement up and down the coast, and that's pretty much what most of the coastal aquaculture fishery works on is natural set. Are we going to get any natural set 50 feet underwater, 8 miles offshore? That's all settled mussels. That's our header rope. We get tremendous mussel sets out there, and it seems to be happening year round. So we can get our own, we can get some seed stock out there, but as you guys that did the tour, you see that we're hatching mussels here too to supplement.
How does your spawning coincide with the inshore?
Um,
You know what I'm saying? I know there's a season in, like in
Yeah.
Castle Bay when everything goes to spawn and they know.
so typically inshore it's like now,
Yeah.
all right? You'll start to see the settlement in June, and then there's usually another settlement late summer to the fall. We're actually seeing various sized mussels settling on these lines, so it looks like it's more continuous. There's definitely pulses. There's obviously pulses of settlement.
Running a tumbler grader, I know we'll probably see them on a tumbler grader so you can take it out and reseed.
We don't have that equipment yet, so we've been doing everything by hand. But we are, with this grant, we're going to purchase that. But as I said, we're not doing any commercial scale harvesting yet. But we hope to be doing that soon. Obviously, biotoxins are an issue. But like Mike said, we're providing mass DMF with mussel samples as essentially a sentinel site. When we go to commercially harvest, we'll have to bridge that when we get to it, but hopefully it gets reasonably resolved this year at the ISSC, and we can figure that out. And then obviously, marine mammal and other protected species interactions are things that we need to be concerned about and continue monitoring and minimize any potential impacts. As far as the integrity of the system, yep.
Is anybody like commercially fishing mussels out in this area, or anything like that?
Not at those depths.
Is there anybody doing certain like bogs? I'm curious if these mussels.
Is there anybody
The big fish
harvesting in Ipswich? Cape Cod Bay, yeah. But not up here. There's nobody up here, right, doing commercial? Yeah. Yeah, I know Cape Cod Bay.
I don't think I heard the question. What was the question?
Commercial wild harvest mussels. Yeah, so Dominic,
Yeah, I've been out with Dominic in Cape Cod.
yeah,
He said that particular spot's almost done, so he's gonna have to go looking. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure he'll have no problem.
yeah.
They'll let him harvest it.
So,
If they let him harvest.
so as far as this whole system integrity, which was one of our tests, our goals to determine, was it turns out that a year ago, especially in January, last January, or a year ago in January, we had that bomb cyclone hit here, and at Jeffrey's Ledge, it was 48-foot seas, right? And other, within that year, 25, 27, those are big storms, right? Throughout, the long line didn't move at all. The anchors sat, and we didn't lose any mussels. The mussels were fine on the lines too, right?
And that's probably because of the depth on the bottom.
It more than likely is. I mean, obviously, the wave dissipation, right? The deeper you go, the less of the energy. So again, that turned out to be a positive factor for us to be offshore.
The
So
line system, I think, really contributes to that, because when you take a raft and you put it on the
a raft wouldn't last. A raft would be gone. Yeah. So again, there seems to be a lot of benefits to this system. Going in deeper water, growing in deeper water, growing deeper, right? And if it can eliminate rafting and allow you to go into rougher waters, you can expand your farming practices.
How did you settle on 400 feet from the main line?
That was,
Is that what other people do?
yeah, that's what other people were doing.
Anybody tried longer?
Yeah, there are longer systems. I don't know what Catalina has. And I think that's what Bill Silks uses. He's about 400, isn't he?
In Australia, where they've done some of the longer lines,
they've just run into more technical
Yeah.
issues, just the handling.
It's manageability.
Yeah, it really is. 400, yeah, that seemed to be
The
a pretty
entry-level
standard.
license in Maine is 400 square feet, and you're allowed to do a 1-foot strip by 400 feet.
Yep.
1 LPA.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if that might have. 'Cause the
We didn't look at the
designs,
main
they all
thing, we
came
just
out the
kind of
same
looked at
thing.
what,
Well, I'm just saying, a lot
Yep.
of the long line designs are designed at 400 foot by 1 foot is 1 LPA.
Yeah.
You're allowed
and we
4
get,
LPAs, so
when you buy the
400 foot.
when you buy the spool of line, it comes in 600-foot spools, right? So
I have seen some of the proposals that are 600-foot lines.
some of
and-
the,
and
are the kelp ones longer?
the kelp lines are 600 feet.
Yeah, I think the biggest I've seen is 600 for kelp.
But another point on that, you know, as far as line length is, one of the negatives of having to go 50 feet is that when you're working the line,
Well, you lose
the
that,
deeper you go,
you're
you lose
losing,
the
you're
edge.
losing 100 feet, you're losing whatever you need to get to the
Can't get out of
surface.
boat.
So you can't use that.
So the deeper you go, the more you give up as far
Right.
as workable line.
Yeah,
But then, as you mentioned here, I mean, that may be what kept them from losing muscles. So there's trade-offs to
Yeah.
your depth.
You know, Bill had problems with Sandy when Sandy came through and dragged anchors and
Mhm.
said it looked like his lines were pressure washed.
yeah.
But he's not as deep as you.
No, and his outer sight is 70 feet max depth. And we had our stuff in Gloucester and Rockport when we were doing the coastal stuff. We were in about 70 feet, right? And we would get winter storm
You also
disturbance.
have, as the waves come in a really shallow site, they come in, they hit the coast, then you gotta
Yeah, you get back.
push them back out as it comes out.
Yeah.
Deep water, you don't tend to have that.
So
kind
you and especially on a raft. I mean, the problem with the raft is they're doing this when you get any kind of wave activity, right? And that affects the growth, right? They're throwing more bristle threads to hold on, so they're not growing. And we're just so far they're. I mean, going on 3 years now. They're growing fine out there. And I think this might be applicable to a lot of places.
The New Hampshire guys are complaining a lot of the bird predation. You're not seeing it.
But they're shallow.
Is that it?
Nobody, as far as I know, nobody's growing at 50 feet like we are.
I thought they said they moved the horizontal line to 60 feet and they were still getting eaten.
This was Mike Chambers' guys? Oh, definitely. Oh, check on that.
Smarter ducks.
What?
Smarter
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's and we saw the duck predation on our coastal sites too. I mean, I can remember early November. I would jump in the water and just go up and down the lines with a camera and just videotape as we went in. And we went in early November, and then we came back like after Thanksgiving, and it's like they were nice, good, almost, you know, basically harvest size mussels, like a good 1-inch or 6-inch core of mussels. We come back in, I jump in the water, and it's like empty lines. Totally empty lines. I mean, they can just, if they find it in it's shallow waters, they'll just strip it clean in days.
Another factor could also be that you're 7.5 miles out
Yeah.
in the water.
Well, I mean, it
You gotta
is.
find
Yeah,
one
they got to
line
find. Yeah.
Or even a couple lines.
So a nice, and again, we've people that first showed up. I was talking about. We have a proposal in for the Atlantic State Fisheries Council for shellfish research consortiums, and that would be one of the projects we would fund, right? To go see, maybe put a long line in deeper water, in waters where the ducks are, and see what the duck predation is. Just an experimental setup kind of thing, and again, build more information for that. Because judging by what we're getting for results, I mean, I think this could be a game changer for opening up more areas, especially rougher waters, for this kind of activity.
That was one of my questions, is what sort of, have you been talking with the guys that are fishing? Because this guy's fishing everywhere at certain
Right,
times of year.
right.
Like, you'll see him come, you'll see him go. Are you communicating with the guys that fish in the area? Do you know who's fishing there?
In with our area,
Yeah.
yeah. Actually, there's really nobody fishing in our area. The couple of lobster gear that are there,
Well, I call
yeah,
lobster fishing.
we know who they are. and where they're coming from. So our boat captain does all the moorings and stuff in Rockport area, so he's very well known. So he pretty much has a good handle on who's out there doing what, kind of thing.
He might be a good emissary too, if he's a local guy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? 'Cause
So what?
I'm local, and I had my own cousin come up and bounce his finger off my chest and say, and this is getting to be a problem. What's that? He says, I
What's-
think it's you.
Yeah. What's funny is the local lobstermen, which pretty much Rockport, right where we go out of, is just lobster fishing. They have no desire to. They're not interested in this. They're making too much money lobstering right now. But if that changes, then maybe they'll want to get into this. But
Have you ever put a tensionometer on the lines to document the tension?
not yet. Again, we've been doing this on a shoestring budget with just enough money to get out there and put stuff out. But now with this, with our S&K funding, we're putting that kind of instrumentation on the line, and part of that consortium is the people involved are people that all those people that Kevin showed this morning, those groups that are looking on that research, they're going to be all part of this consortium, working on different aspects of design, the engineering, the entanglements, potential, and then just we're going to look at something else that hasn't been done, just the food supply. What's out there? So we're going to be doing oceanographic sampling at farm sites from Maine down to New York.
And I can help answer that a little bit too. So there is some of that work being done with tensometers at University of
Yeah, New Hampshire.
Dave
Yep.
Frederickson
Yep.
from the Naval Academies had that idea, and so they're doing some initial testing. to see
They're doing that with
what
one of the-
strains on the different
Yeah.
plants. It's not exactly this setup, but it's a kelp long line. With,
Yeah, the kelp.
With the ideas are that yes, we need a lot more of that.
Yeah.
To start gathering baseline data, how this gear is similar and different than other fishing gears, tensions and.
What was really good was at NACE, we had that whole day that Tim chaired one of the sessions, and it was basically focused on offshore aquaculture and mostly the mussel and some of the kelp stuff. And from that, we kind of basically created this little consortium from the people that were there that day. And then this RFP comes out, and it's like, hey, let's try to get some real money for this. So hopefully we get it. If we do, it'll go a long ways to enhancing the research that's going on here to promote shellfish aquaculture, and we're kind of focusing on moving out, because I think our coastal waters are tapped out, and with warming waters, especially warming surface waters, I think a lot of the problems with shellfish sanitation or even just coastal sanitation in general are just going to become exacerbated, and I think it's just going to be, if anything, shellfish beds are going to get closed, coastal shellfish beds, because there's just not going to be too much toxin, biotoxins or bacteria or whatever in the water.
So, I don't want to
Yep.
delay you too much, but I can add a little more on those tensometers.
Yeah.
Should I do it now or afterwards?
Let's do it as a follow-up.
Okay.
All right.
One more, I saw that in your biological assessment, you're supposed to monitor for exotics. Who put that in there, and what did they want you to do, and why?
I don't know. That was one of the conditions. That was one of the in that boilerplate they gave us. That was
Yeah.
one of the sections.
What if you find an exotic, what are you supposed to do?
Report it. Again, we're not. There's none of that out offshore, and we're certainly not bringing anything out there like that. It was monitoring. I do some exotic monitoring here anyways for benthic invertebrates, the invasives, and I've been doing it for a number of years. So that was kind of a no problem. You know, we can easily monitor for that stuff. So the hatchery that you guys saw over lunch that Mark showed you, so there's the little seed stock. We're trying to get them to get onto this coconut rope. The idea of that is if we can get them on the rope and then maybe just stick it right out at that size. At that size, they can crawl around, but offshore, they're not going to go anywhere. So they're going to go up and down the rope, but they're not going to jump off the rope and go find a rocky bottom or something, right? So that's an experiment. The idea with the hatchery is maybe we can hold seed at different sizes and be able to get a product throughout the year, right? So have a continual supply of shellfish on a yearly basis.
Do you have any data on whether they're getting knocked off at all, or like?
Any what?
Or like, how do you know that they're not getting knocked off?
We don't. We're just getting into this.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, we haven't. We're actually waiting for our pathology test to be able to transfer seed from Massachusetts. So it's actually in process. So once we're good to go with that, we'll start transporting some seed offshore. The other thing we're doing, part of this NOAA S&K is monitoring for protected species. So this is our this is a hydrophone that we are currently deploying, and that's it on the header rope, and that records for 2 weeks, and we'll pull it back up. I'll swap it out. I'll basically change batteries, change memory card, and throw it back down for another 2 weeks. And then somebody's got to analyze the 2 weeks worth of analog data. But we have some software from the Cornell lab that does the right whale stuff that you can upload. It uploads an hour at a time, and you can process through and look for the specific pattern for whale or any other marine mammal signals. So we do a quick search, but we have student labor money to do that, to sit in front of the computer and analyze all that stuff for us. The other thing we're doing for the protected species is we're going to put GoPro cameras on a time-lapse circuit on the surface and just let them run, again, 2 weeks at a time, which will fill up the memory cards on them, but see if we can monitor real-time any protected species or turtle or whatever that goes by in that time. That's something that definitely needs some work. We have a weatherproof camera system with a solar panel and a time-lapse circuit, but it needs to be submersion proof. So we're working on that. We're trying to seal it up. And then we have no idea with splashing of essentially fogging the lens at some point how long that's going to work. So we might need some kind of windshield wiper type thing, which, believe it or not, I did some stuff off a Cassius ledge years ago down at 100 feet. We actually had a time-lapse camera that we left underwater for a year, and we just had a little piece of rubber and just the current cleaned the lens enough for us to get year-long time-lapse video. So we'll play around. So those are things. The hydrophone's already operational, and the time-lapse video system should be pretty good. I taught a scuba class this spring, and I actually had it in the pool at Salem State to see if it was totally waterproof. So I laid it down on the bottom. It still leaks a little. I got to do a little more sealing to make it. It's basically everything sits in one of those watertight boxes, but it's got a camera lens on it. Yeah.
Did you have a hydrophone when you actually detected was it the
No,
killer
no.
whale? Oh, that was before.
That was before. So the whale was what, 2 summers ago, right? Because Steve was still
Yes.
with us. We just happened to be out there working, and it just surfaced and kept going. So didn't seem to be impacted by it all by all.
Do we like temperature sensors or depth sensors?
Yeah, we do have temperature sensors. I got one down there now that we just haven't come across yet. It's on the header rope. That's been recording for the last year. But we got the first year's good data.
Depth at all on the ropes?
The rope is sitting at 50 feet, so it's
To see if it's moving at all.
that's what we're about to get monitoring. So we're gonna put a current meter on it, and also we have these little they measure like X, Y, and Z plane. So we'll see how those work. But ultimately, want to get some Dave Frederick's stuff out there.
We tried the pingers like we use on the donuts,
The acoustic release things? Oh, the deterrent? No, those. None of that stuff works.
It does for a little while.
Well, yeah.
The harbor foreman says,
We
"Figure
do
it out."
it-
They think it's the dinner bell, I swear.
Oh, well, I could.
I undid 'em.
We do have the orange floats. So there was a study by Scott Krause at the New England Aquarium that said that right whales can see orange and avoid it. Again, next time I see a right whale, I'll ask him. What don't you like about the color orange? So based on that, you can pick the floats any color you want. So let's pick orange. If it works, right? So that's all I have. The people that are involved with this, as I said, Legal Seafoods is our industry partner, and they've basically got us the financial support that we needed to get out and get this started. And now that we have the S&K funding, which we just picked up in September, we can ramp this up and get through a really good feasibility study. Our permit's up next year, so we need to go through a renewal, refresh process, and at that point we're maybe try to get more long lines out, maybe not all the way full tilt, but start maybe build into the expansion. But the bottom line is we're academics. I mean, we do have somebody that obviously wants all our product, but hopefully we can get through this and make, for at least this coast, a commercially feasible enterprise that people can get into. And especially the shellfish sanitation issues, the testing, if that gets resolved and it's a reasonable, I mean, obviously you should expect to pay or share the costs of the testing for your site. You're selling product, you're making a profit, so that should be part of your operating costs. But the ridiculous amount of tests we have to do now is just doesn't make any sense. Mark and myself are both certified, FDA certified to do the Abraxas test, that shipboard testing. So we're planning on, we have funding to pay for testing with the S&K grant, so we're actually planning on having a commercial harvest, at least one this year, in the late summer, early fall. And Legal Seafoods will take it and serve it for at least a week in their restaurants. Yeah, well, as we're going along, we're building all the pieces, parts for a business plan. Yeah, exactly. We actually have our university financial people are looking at, because we're almost to the next step. So if we build this out commercially, what do we need? Well, we need a boat. We need a bigger boat. So just working on Catalina's model, they have a 75-foot vessel. They got a surplus military vessel, troop transport, and then they outfitted it. And it cost them about $1 million between purchase and retrofit. And then you're going to need a captain and crew, and probably at least probably 2 licensed captain people, and then at least 1 or 2 crew, all right? Because this is going to go out. You're going to be out there working 1 or 2 days a week, and then in between you'll be doing other stuff. So at this point in time, Salem State has no desire to get into the mussel farming business. So we're looking at like maybe a trawler or larger fishing vessel in Gloucester that isn't making their money commercial fishing anymore, but still has the vessel and the crew and the captain and all that, and working out some cooperative agreement with them, so paying them to work the farm.
Yeah, there are a couple of commercial gillnet guys that probably aren't fishing anymore that definitely have.
So that's kind of where we're at. But also in this grant, we have money to pay a business school grad student to work on a business plan, kind of stuff. So we will be doing another workshop next year. So we had 2 workshops for the 2 years. So every year, and even I go to the aquaculture meetings every winter and do an update, see what's going on. So things are happening, and I hope that the prospects look really good in the next couple of years for people that really want to get into this. And the Aqua Act, if you can get a long-term permit or lease or however that works, if that works out, I mean, that's one of Bill Silks' concern, is stuck with the 5-year permitting process. He said, you know, the only way you're going to develop this, you know, all his farm sites in Rhode Island, he's got 20, 25-year leases on. You know, so he's not interested in getting offshore in federal waters because he's actually interested in doing something at the wind farm off Block Island, maybe doing some activity there. So prospects look good, and we'll keep slugging away and keep everybody posted. Any other questions?
What did you use, what you're growing now is all wild spat collection on site? Am I assuming that, or
Yeah, so far, yeah.
using the fuzzy rope, is that what you're using?
No, we're using that.
Using that?
Yeah.
So
we bring stuff back in, yeah, and that's,
You're stripping the line?
you strip it, you sort it, and then you resock it. That's how it.
So you starting out with that, or you starting out?
No, well, right now we're grabbing stuff pretty much just off our header rope.
Off your header rope,
Yeah.
and then sock it,
Yep,
rehang it,
yep.
and this stuff is hung independently? There's no line
Yeah.
that goes in it, like when you sock the cotton sock? it's a line.
You just fill that right up.
Copper line
Yep,
goes
yep,
in
and it
the
just
sock.
ties off. The picture of it over there in the poster. Basically, we just tie it off with some twine. So that's the Canadian socking, and we just have that by the roll, and you can buy it in different
Sizes?
sizes. Yeah. So I think the black one is 5 millimeter. It's like width.
So you don't know if this helps with predation, you know what I'm saying, the eider ducks, can they eat this?
Oh, they'll eat that.
They'll eat right through it?
Yeah, because they climb out of it. That actually
Right.
that cotton thread.
Soon they come out, the bissel.
Yeah, it
just
becomes
hang out.
basically the bissel threads wrap through it. Yeah.
But there is, at UNH, they're doing some studies on different types of socks.
Yeah. So
For
everybody. Yeah.
predation.
Socking it, yeah,
Yeah.
So they're
socking and
testing
actually,
different predation socks.
Yeah.
I know some people doing plastic.
So they're looking at
Yeah.
predation on sock mussels because he's hanging his right off the cages, right?
No, they also have longline gear
Yeah.
out there where they're doing mussels, and they have funding, and they're doing testing on different types of
Different materials. Yeah.
for predation
To
reasons.
reduce the predation, right.
Yeah. So I don't think they have preliminary results, but they don't have final
Yeah.
results yet.
Yeah, because his funding just started too, right? Last year,
Yeah.
his Sea Grant.
No,
So there's a lot of money between Sea Grant and there's another consortium, Sea Grant consortium grant with UMass and MIT and UNH, and then they asked us to be a test site. So we're offering, again, we have this site out here where anybody that has a project, you want to test something out there, we'll put it out there. We'll go out every 2 weeks and
So your Army Corps permit limits you to the 3 long lines?
right now 3 long lines and just mussels.
You have to modify that permit to,
Yeah. Yeah, you just put in a modification and,
be a modification.
yeah, and it probably depends on what the modification is, whether, how much review it's gonna get. Kinda. You know, if it's just, probably for us to do other species, should be an issue if they're being grown,
So,
you know, as long as they're native. I have a little bit of a problem doing non-native species, doing aquaculture non-native species.
you've got enough invasives.
It just, yeah, we have enough invaders, exactly.
Water chemistry factor into your initial site selection, or was it more about boundaries and sanctuaries and trying to find somewhere?
Yeah, honestly, we thought fishing activity would be the biggest
Yeah.
concern. And then learned about the whale entanglement stuff. In other protected species, so turtles are a big issue. Turtles, especially with surface floats, if there's no tension on them, they'll hit them and roll, and they basically wrap it right around their neck. So one thing that we're finding that certainly would resolve that is just a high flyer float, because it's got the weighted, so the rope is down, right? It's not laying on the surface; it's sunk. So that's a simple fix in turtle areas. We're probably not really in the turtle area, but they do. I mean, there are sightings all the way up to Canada. So for the whale sightings, I went back using those data layers. Again, it wasn't all in one place, but I went back 25 years and specifically looking for right whales. And the closest a right whale ever came to our site was about 3 miles away, and it was only like once in 25 years. So again, you want to definitely sight away from where they traditionally go, right? That's not to say they're not going to go there. And humpbacks are going all over the place. But
That's observation data based off people seeing them and reporting them? Or-
yeah, it was pretty much reported.
Well, it's
data.
that, it's also dedicated flights.
There's some aerial surveys, different times of the year.
But it's a good question to
Yeah.
the point, you know, when Ted says there was only one sighting.
Right.
Doesn't
It,
mean
is,
there's
it
no
doesn't mean
more
they weren't there.
there.
Exactly.
That's-
Exactly.
Of the times people were
So
looking
that
at-
synthetic project, that if that really comes to pass, and they can really get that kind of resolution and that kind of monitoring,
Mhm.
right? Looking at satellite imagery and warning you that whales are swimming near your site, or so I was telling Jason about it, the commercial shipping, right? They're striking whales, they're killing whales, right? Not just entangling, but they're striking and killing whales. And when whales are sighted, the commercial vessels have to slow down, and then that backlogs them coming into port and loading and unloading, and that can, Jason was saying, millions of dollars, right? So if you could have a satellite tracking system that could show that there's whales in front of you like 10 miles ahead, then you could slow that individual vessel down and then just deal with that individual vessel as opposed to a whole quadrant.
Also, all the ships are going slower now, just to minimize the,
Yeah.
the thing, and so that's just sort of wasteful.
So I mean, there'd be, if that comes to be developed, I mean, that has a lot of really good positives for lots of industries.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of multiple industries looking to go offshore right now is that synthetic applied technology's got a NOAA SBIR grant, which is phase 1, seed money to start trying things out.
Sea Grant has a lot of similar development
with
for
that-
sensors and things like that. Yep.
With that, you know, we introduced them to everybody in aquaculture industry. Since then, they also got, we hooked them into BOEM's wind leasing process.
Yep.
And they now have an MOU with BOEM for one of the wind lease areas or with BOEM, one of those two. So in other words, they're gonna pay for a lot of that synthetic
Yeah.
light technology
Yeah.
development.
And I
As
just
well
did-
as that whale simulator
Yeah.
that I talked about.
Yeah.
They were, so that was working through the aquaculture
That's another thing.
arena.
Yeah.
BOEM picked that up now and they're funding
They're funding
development
that.
of
Yep.
So a lot of the stuff's getting funded now by these other industries that's gonna help
Yep. Yeah.
various industries.
So yeah, we're small potatoes at this point. And yeah, if there's a lot of money in alternate energy development and that, those are the dollars that can, and even the kelp, the Department of Energy is putting in as an alternate fuel source.
A lot of money, at least
Yeah.
for now. We'll see
Yeah.
how long that lasts,
Yeah.
but for now.
The problem I have, the issue I see with kelp, you know, especially with the flack we get from our long line sitting in the water like this, is now you're doing this, and you got whales trying to, and I don't know how you're gonna,
With kelp, you mean that, like that experimental array?
yeah.
Right.
So instead of you're growing this way, I mean, kelp need the sunlight, so you got to grow them this way.
They're all horizontal closer.
Yeah. So if there's a lot of issues with us doing this and the vertical lines we have, this is going to be a,
Oh, you could
And it's shallow,
probably
too.
mount grow lights down 50 feet.
yeah, you can put grow lights down. Right, there's kelp growing 100 feet at Cassius Ledge. So,
I don't wanna pay that electric bill.
Oh, it's solar powered.
Yeah.
so I mean, there are,
Good luck
you know,
with that.
maybe we can grow it 50 feet on a long line. We haven't, we're not getting any recruits out there. I thought we would, because coastally we did. When you put a long line out and you got kelp growing on it by the end of by the next winter.
Was there any cost associated with the permitting process itself? Like, do you
Any what?
pay for like the permitting process?
Costs? Is there any cost?
So with an Army Corps permit, only when you do individual permits, and typically we do $10 for, like state agencies. I would think that we probably did 10 for you because you're associated with Salem State. For private ventures, it's 100. But if you're going
But
through
that's
the
nothing,
PCN
yeah.
process, which is what I would anticipate, we don't charge for that.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Do you have any idea what the leasing structure would be? The Aqua Act is super
federal
vague.
waters?
Yeah, federal.
Well, yeah, right now, you can't get a lease
Right,
in federal waters,
right.
so there is no lease cost, it's just getting the permits to do the activity. So there's no lease costs, like there are in state waters.
I think the hidden cost with permitting, even though that entry fee is minimal, I mean, probably have $10 in my pocket right now, but it's the time. You
It's
gotta
the
sit
time, and
down,
if you have to
fill
go
out
do
the form.
surveys and all that, which you're gonna have to do. I mean, you're gonna have to show that the site.
Yeah. How does that work from a business point? So you're academic, so you have those resources, but like, you know, say like you were saying you want to get like a retired lobsterman involved or something like that.
You
You'd
can
have to
get-
contract out like with a.
Well, you can get small business loans, especially for agriculture, aquaculture.
Yeah, I mean actually like getting the survey done. They would just ask like a contractor or something. They would get,
Yeah,
like,
or piggyback on, like for the Horseshoe Shoal site when they went to throw in that permit, they just used the Cape Wind
Oh yeah.
impact.
Perfect.
Nice.
That might be how they chose that site, huh?
I
Because
think
they already
that's
had all
yeah. I
that.
think that's why they chose it. Not so much that it would be a good place to grow
That's why they
shellfish.
wound up
Yeah.
Which is exactly why they chose that
Yeah.
site, was because they
Yeah.
figured they could short circuit the permitting process.
Yeah.
Because it was already work in progress, and they had all this information. But the one thing that they didn't realize was is that even though that's federal waters, it's under state jurisdiction, right?
Yeah, that was.
Agriculture.
Yeah.
So, one thing was getting the Army permit, which is basically the authorization to use the site. And they still needed operational permits from the state of Massachusetts to have shellfish in their possession, to grow the shellfish and to land the shellfish. Because under Magnuson-Stevens, that area is under state control for shellfish and aquaculture, even though it's federal waters. Basically, what they call a donut hole between,
Yeah.
it's between